You look around and see the following conditions: rising prices, crashing markets, people losing jobs, and constant news reports about a looming war. This may sound like 2023, but actually, it's from almost 100 years ago, during the Great Depression. If conditions were so bleak back then, what made the Great Depression great? How did Americans live through and survive this terrible period? Above all, what can we learn from this moment in history to make sure it never repeats itself? Hello and welcome to History of Life, where we relive history's greatest moments and the eras in between. Today we look back at one of America's darkest periods in its history, the Great Depression, and understand the painstaking journey of the people who lived through it. The Great Depression is one of America's most defining moments, often referred to as the nation's worst economic downturn. But it was more of a disaster rather than just a mere downturn. As it raged from 1929 to 1938, it negatively impacted over 61 million Americans, many of whom lost their jobs, families, and homes. The adverse effects weren't just on Americans, though, it was felt worldwide. So, what really happened? Where did it all come from? What measures were taken by those in charge to help alleviate the collective suffering? Were the measures even helpful at all, considering it took 10 years to end the Great Depression? These are the questions we hope to find answers to as we take a deeper look into all that occurred in that era. There's one thing we do know for sure. Even if the Great Depression was a backbreaking and soul crushing time for millions of Americans, the ones who lived to tell their tale prove that determination and togetherness helped Americans weather that terrible economic storm. Before all the hardship and bleakness set in, America was going through one of its most prosperous eras. The 1920s didn't earn the nickname the Roaring Twenties for nothing. that decade, particularly the slowing down of the manufacturing industry toward the later years of the 1920s, which led to layoffs and credit freezes. Devastating droughts throughout the American Great Plains, causing the disastrous Dust Bowl period. And a series of bank failures that spawned bank runs by panicked customers taking out all their savings from their accounts. Ever since Black Tuesday, things really began going south, and no one would imagine how long the Great Depression would last, granted that America had always bounced back after several economic downturns before 1929. When the Great Depression reached its peak in 1932, a vast number of American families didn't even have a single wage earner at home. When it was clear that there was no getting out of the difficult circumstances anytime soon, many families just banded together and carried on. The biggest hurdle was providing food for the home, as the droughts had severely affected food supplies. Many families turned to planting their own kitchen gardens and growing vegetables and herbs that were suitable for the climate. Mothers would also mend torn clothes and shoes to eliminate the need to buy new apparel. At the height of the Great Depression, over 3 million children aged 7 to 17 had to drop out of school. For many of these education-less children, the alternative was to look for work to help their parents, or if they found none, the next option was to go begging. While the divorce rate was moderately low during this period, many families were torn apart by desertion. Fathers were so racked with guilt and shame of being unable to fully provide for their families that they just abandoned them outright. To cope, many mothers and married women moved back in with immediate and extended family. This increase in abandonments also led many women to join the workforce so they could provide for their children. It was rather unfortunate, however, that while many women had no choice but to enlist for work, scores of men were upset that women were becoming their competition for jobs. It's ironic, considering there were jobs that the men didn't want to touch, like being a secretary, nurse, or telephone operator. Another adverse scenario from all of this was that single women were given more priority when it came to hiring. But married women were often shut out because they already had husbands providing for them, and to address the shortage of jobs, it was advised that only one breadwinner would come from each household. The Great Depression truly did cause such a massive shortage of jobs. Between 1930 and 1931 alone, Henry Ford had to lay off about 75,000 workers from his car manufacturing company due to low demand. He was actually luckier because many of his automobile maker counterparts had shut down. Manufacturers like the Pierce Arrow Motor Car Company, the American Austin, the DeVoe Hall Motors Company all folded during the Great Depression. From 1929 to 1933, which were the peak years of the economic disaster, real gross domestic product fell by a staggering 29%. Similarly, the unemployment rate sunk by 25% by 1933, meaning that more than 12 million people were out of work. By this time, nearly 7,000 banks, which accounted for 1/3 of the entire US banking system, had failed. It doesn't come off as a shock then that the suicide rate during this bleak period was at a high of 22.1%, which meant that for every 100,000 people, 22 people killed themselves out of desperation. Thankfully, many people chose to persevere even in the face of extreme hardship. It is said that adversity breeds innovation, and sure enough, people improvised on forms of leisure and entertainment. Before everything imploded, going to the cinema and watching stage plays were popular choices for amusement. When the Great Depression happened, seeing a movie had become too costly, leading to more than one-third of all movie houses in the country closed by 1934. So instead, people turned to the radio, owing to its affordability and easier accessibility. Listeners tuned in to various programs like radio dramas and comedies, and swing music was trending throughout. Miniature golf, with its inexpensive rates of up to 50 cents per round, became a fad during the decade, which caused hundreds of miniature golf courses to spring up around the country. Playing cards and board games like Monopoly and Scrabble also kept families and friends entertained. Apart from engaging in a the Securities and Exchange Commission. FDR also took advantage of broadcast radio's wide reach, engaging many of his constituents with his fireside chats, wherein he discussed progress made by the New Deal programs and any other projects his administration was working on. So did the New Deal work at all to stop the Great Depression? To a large extent, FDR's New Deal did help a lot of Americans get back on their feet, especially when it came to employment. The New Deal's relief aid programs were also much more inclusive and extensive, even including direct federal aid for unemployment relief. It also launched a wave of reforms and regulations for the banking and finance industries, ensuring protection for investors and account holders. Over time, many historians and economists who re-evaluated the New Deal's efficacy came to conclude that it wasn't the overall success it was touted to be. Regardless, we cannot understate how valuable it was for those suffering to see a working government spring into action, giving them a renewed sense of hope after feeling so defeated for a time. And after such a seemingly endless period of time, in June of 1938, it was finally declared that the Great Depression was over. It's important to note that the Great Depression wasn't just confined to the United States. Many parts of the world also suffered economically, especially in hard-hit countries like Canada, Great Britain, and Germany. And speaking of Germany, it's said that part of the reason why Hitler rose to power was because he rallied Germans from their despair and hopelessness, leading them to join the Nazi Party. Ironically, it was the advent of World War II which expedited the end of the Great Depression. Just like the boom that came in the Roaring '20s right after World War I, World War II also mobilized a war economy in the country. This brought about unparalleled government spending for employment for the armed forces and other auxiliary positions, manufacturing for weapons, tanks, ammunitions for the war effort, and transportation and freight to move artillery and other supplies. Once again, America was thrust into a world war across the Atlantic Ocean, and a communal spirit was fostered to help defeat the enemy. It's quite cynical to think that the end of the Great Depression led to another impactful tragedy. Even if this event happened almost a century ago, the lens of history allows us to constantly reassess the real cause and effect of what really happened. Like the Great Depression, it's easy to lay the blame solely on Black Tuesday of 1929, but over time, we come to realize that it was really caused by a compounding of various factors. Unregulated financial systems, unbalanced stock speculation, and just downright corporate greed. So many families and communities suffered undeservingly through no fault of their own. And what made matters worse was that the government leaders and agencies who were supposed to instantly offer financial assistance and moral support failed to do so. While it is comforting to know that Americans carried on to make it through America's worst economic downturn, it shouldn't have to reach disaster levels before any action is done. We can only hope that even with modern-day recessions and industrial scares, may we never have to face another Great Depression in our lifetimes ever again.
Thank you for watching History of Life. We hope you found this look back on the Great Depression enlightening. Like this video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos like this. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to know when the next one comes out. See you in the next video.